My guest today is Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, a philosopher, computer scientist, and one of the most prominent voices in the field of metaphysical idealism. If you've ever wondered about the deeper nature of reality, my guest will keep you intrigued. Dr. Kastrup holds 2 PhDs, one in philosophy and another in computer engineering. He is widely known for his work on the idea that reality is fundamentally mental and that the universe itself is shaped by consciousness, not the other way around. Let's dive into this fascinating topic together with Dr. Kastrup. Bernardo, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And to start our conversation, would you please give an explanation in a nutshell for those who cannot read your book? What is idealism, or even, let's go further, what is analytic idealism?
Idealism is associated in the Western tradition with the notion that the world is essentially mental. It's mind stuff out there. Now, a lot of people misinterpret it and they think that what an idealist claims is that the world is in my mind or in your mind. That's not the claim. The claim is that there is an external world that we share, that we inhabit. It is really out there. It's not in here. But it too is made of mental states, which are not in your mind, not in my mind, but they are mental states. An example to illustrate how plausible this is: my thoughts are mental states, but they are not in your mind. You do not have direct access to my thoughts. You only have access to the appearances of my thoughts, which is my face, facial expressions, my patterns of brain activity, and so forth. So from your point of view, my thoughts are external, and yet my thoughts are mental states. In exactly the same way, under analytic idealism, there is a world out there. It's not in our individual minds, but it too is mental. It's made of mental states. Now, what we call colloquially the physical world, the things we see, touch, smell, hear, these are representations of the real world. In other words, physicality, what the real world looks like when observed from the outside. Physicality is the appearance of the real world. Just like the appearance of the sky for a pilot inside an airplane are the dials on the dashboard. The dials on the dashboard represent the real states of the sky, so much so that a pilot can fly by instruments alone. He doesn't need to see the sky directly. And the dashboard conveys accurate information about the real sky outside. So we have to take it seriously. But we should not think that the dashboard inside the airplane is the sky. It is not. It's a representation thereof. In exactly the same way, under analytic idealism, the physical world is our dashboard representation of the real world, which is not physical, it is mental.
Do you mind going a little bit deeper into metaconsciousness? What do you mean by that when you use this term?
Well, metaconsciousness is defined quite rigorously in neuroscience. To be phenomenally conscious of something is to just have an experience. For instance, to have the experience of breathing, the experience of your rib cage inflating, deflating, the airflow through your nostrils. That's an experience. That's consciousness. Metaconsciousness comes in addition to it. To be metaconscious, you need not only to have the experience, you need to be explicitly aware that you are having the experience. Most of the times, we are not metaconscious of our breathing. We are not aware that we are experiencing our breathing. But we are experiencing our breathing at all times. So metaconsciousness is an added thing. You may be conscious, but not metaconscious. But if you are metaconscious, you are, by definition, also phenomenally conscious.
Maybe you could bring some left brain and more empirical evidence, especially for the people who are quite unfamiliar or maybe uncomfortable with the idea that the world is completely different than what they think. Maybe some evidence, something to crack the mind of a skeptic?
There are two types of evidence. One is analytical, when we can prove that we cannot possibly perceive the world as it actually is. And the other one is empirical. So I'll address both. Let's start with the analytical evidence. We know that our perceptual apparatus, our eyes, the parts of your brain that process vision and all that stuff, it has evolved for fitness. In other words, we have evolved to perceive the world in whatever way makes it more likely to survive and reproduce, not to perceive the world as it actually is from an evolutionary perspective. It doesn't matter whether we see the world as it is or not, so long as we gather information that is accurate about the world that helps us survive. And you can prove mathematically in game theory, like Donald Hoffman has done at the University of California, that evolution would never have favored truth. We would be swiftly driven to extinction if we actually saw the world as it is. Another line of evidence, analytical evidence, is the following. For us to perceive the world as it actually is, our internal cognitive states would have to mirror the real states of the world. But there is no upper bound to the entropy of the world, to the dispersion of states, to the disorder of the world. So if we were to mirror that world in our inner cognitive states, there would be no upper bound to our internal entropy, to our internal disorder, to the dispersion of states in our cognition, in our body. And that is not compatible with life. Life depends on the maintenance of our structural and dynamical integrity. So there has to be an upper bound to our cognition. Otherwise, we could die merely by looking at the world. Now, that has never happened. Nobody has ever died from perceiving the world. So right there and then, you know that we cannot perceive the world as it actually is. We have to perceive the world in a way that encodes information about the world, so to put an upper limit in our internal entropy, in our internal dispersion of states, in our internal disorder, so to say, which is exactly what the dashboard does.
Mm-hmm.
Pilots have flight manuals and they are thick, but they are not infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Flight manuals don't need to tell the pilot what to do for each specific shape of cloud they come across. They only need to know what to do for each specific configuration of dial indications on their dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
That limits the entropy pilots have to contend with. Now, empirically, we see a, colloquially speaking, physical world, right? A world that appears on the screen of perception, and it has shapes, forms, boundaries, colors, and all that. If we saw the world, if we perceive the world as it is, then these physical states, colloquially speaking, would have to have standalone existence. In other words, they would not depend on whether we are observing or measuring the world. The states of the sky don't depend on whether the airplanes sensors are making measurements of air speed, air humidity, and all that. No, the states of the sky exist even when there are no airplanes around. The same would have to apply to physical states. If physical states are real, in other words, they are not an artifact of our cognition. They are really out there. They don't depend on us. Then they would have to have properties regardless of whether we are measuring them or not. Now, 50 years of experimentation in foundations of physics, starting in the 70s and culminating with the Nobel Prize in 2022, only 2 years ago. These experiments have shown repeatedly and have been confirmed again and again and again that this is not how physical states work. You cannot say that a measurement merely reveals a pre-existing physical state. All experiments show us that a measurement produces a physical state, that a physical state is the outcome of a measurement, just like a dashboard indication on the airplane is the outcome of a measurement by the airplane's sensors. If the sensors don't measure anything, the dashboard shows nothing. And it turns out that that is exactly what we see when we experiment with matter at the smallest levels of granularity. When you experiment with photons and electrons,
Mm-hmm.
we see that this is the same conclusion. Now, you can escape this conclusion by postulating one of two theoretical fantasies for which we have absolutely no empirical evidence, like Everettian multiverses or superdeterminism. But these are fantasies, they have no empirical grounding. So the conclusion is the world that we measure is not physical. So it's probably mental because that's the only other thing we know to exist, right? And physical states are the result of measurements, just like dashboard states are the results of measurement.
Would you allow a thought that in the past we had different perception of the world, that it actually has been adjusted? Let's say the dashboard has been adjusted to perceive it differently. Obviously, we are speculating. What do you think?
Well, that's even independent of one's philosophical opinions or positions. This is absolutely certain because perception is a product of our cognitive system. Bees perceive a very different world. They see ultraviolet light. We don't. Insects with compound eyes see the world very differently. Spiders have eyes in the back of their heads. They have 360-degree vision. That's completely different from how we perceive it. Some other animals have sensory modalities that we don't have. Some animals pick up magnetic fields. We don't. Bats have radar, acoustic radar. They can produce 3D images based on radar reflections, so they can see through objects. So can dolphins. They can see your internal organs. So every species perceives the world differently, independently of philosophical position. And it stands to reason, if we go beyond this, when we perceive the world, we never experience a raw perception. The integrated information theory of consciousness explains why this is so. Perceptions, raw perceptions, go into the raw vision goes into the back of your brain, to the visual cortex, and from there it is processed in successive layers in which interpretations come to play a role. So the world we see is not the world of raw perception. It's a mixture of perception with interpretation. And there are experiments, easy experiments you can do at home that shows that, like the picture of the old woman or the young woman. Depending on how you look at it, it's a young woman or it's an old woman. Or the rabbit versus the duck picture. So you see something else depending on how you organize your interpretation. And those layers of interpretation are culture bound, so they can change a lot faster than our basic genome changes through the evolutionary line. So it is possible that people 3,000 years ago, living in a different culture under different assumptions, different semantic references, that the world they perceived, which is already a conflation of raw perception and interpretation, was actually a quite different world. Yeah.
How I understand it, our evolution allowed us to structure this world so that we can live in it without going crazy. Too many incoming signals which we cannot process or interpret make our physical existence unbearable or extremely difficult. Now we are probably at the point in the evolution where we can cope with this world, perceiving it as the way we do today, but we are looking for the ways, I mean, some of us for sure, to escape it again. Why do you think we do that?
Because we are the only animals that have evolved culture and philosophical curiosity. For us, it's not about just survival anymore. For us, it's about satisfying curiosity. We want to know how the world actually is. And we know enough to know now that we never perceive the world as it actually is. The world as it actually is tends to be very, very different qualitatively from the screen of perception. And we are curious, want to know what's actually going on because we are like airplane pilots that were born in an airplane cockpit, and the cockpit never had windows. It only had dashboard dials. So all we have ever had was the dashboard. And for the longest time, we thought the dashboard was the sky because all we have is the dashboard. And everything happens as if the dashboard were the sky. But once we realize this, once we realize that we are actually staring at a dashboard, we become curious. We want to know what is behind the dashboard. We want to see the real sky, which in the real world stands to be as different from physicality as the real sky is different from an airplane dashboard. In other words, it's unfathomably richer. There's a lot more going on than we perceive because we don't need to perceive everything. We only need to perceive what is salient to our survival. Everything else would be just cognitive overload. It would make our survival more difficult because it's saturating us with information that isn't useful.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we filtered that out and we encoded everything else to perceive everything else in a way that facilitates our survival and limits our internal entropy, as opposed to seeing things for how they actually are. So, the conclusion, and this is pretty certain, I mean, this is hardly speculation. There are so many lines of reasoning and evidence that converge here. It's essentially clear now that we are immersed in mystery. We never got to see the world in which we live right now and have ever always lived. We never got to see it as it actually is. Now, can we bypass our cognitive system? Physiologically, I would say no. You'd have to go in the direction of spirituality and make some assumptions and postulate some hypotheses if you want to believe that you can bypass this dashboard in life. So I don't know about that. I don't think there is a clear case to make that we can bypass it. The clear case is that we have a dashboard in front of our eyes and we never see things as they actually are.
How idealism, how this new understanding of the world changed the way you approach your day-to-day life?
At first, it didn't, because as a philosopher and a computer engineer, I am very conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you arrive at a certain conclusion with high confidence, with high certainty, that this is how the world actually is, it is a set of mental states and a cognitive structure, it stays here up in your head and it doesn't really change your life. But over the years, it sunk down into my emotional life as well. And there are a number of things it changes, very fundamental things it changes. For instance, your relationship with death is very different because the way we think about death today presupposes that our consciousness is a temporary, ephemeral product of particular physical arrangements in the form of a living brain. And when those arrangements decompose, then there is no consciousness. And then everything that you consider to be yourself, your conscious inner life, is supposed to be gone. And that leads to nihilism, to cynicism, to depression. Under analytic idealism, life is a dissociative process in a field of subjectivity. You are that field, you are that one universal subject, but you are undergoing dissociation just like we undergo dissociation. When you dream, you are dissociated from the rest of your mind. You think you are your dream avatar and not the rest of the dream. But in fact, you are doing the whole dream. So a dream is a dissociative state. When you forget something that you later remember, that's a dissociative state. And there are clinically serious dissociative states like dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, in which your consciousness really seems to break down into multiple disjoint centers of awareness. So under analytic idealism, we are a dissociation. We are like a personality of a natural mind that has multiple personality disorder. And life or biology is what that dissociation looks like. So the end of life is not the end of your subjectivity, the end of your mind, the end of your consciousness. It's the end of the dissociation. It's like waking up from the dream. When you wake up from the dream, your dream avatar is dead.
But you're not sad.
You're not sad. You know that it was you all along. And by the way, you still remember the dream. So that's the first thing that changes. Death no longer means the annihilation of the conscious self. On the contrary, it means an expansion of the conscious self because life is what a dissociation looks like. So death is the end of the dissociation. It's the reassociation of our conscious inner life with our cognitive surroundings. It also changes the way we look upon other animals and other people. because under analytic idealism, the subjectivity looking at the world from behind your eyes is the same subjectivity that looks out to the world from behind my eyes and from behind my cat's eyes and from behind an amoeba's sensory systems, from behind a plant. It's the same subjectivity, and each individual living being is just a dissociated complex of that one subjectivity that exists. So, in a very real sense, under analytic idealism, if you impose suffer on another, you're actually imposing suffering on yourself. And when the dissociation ends, you become aware of that because you're no longer dissociated from that suffering that you caused. You reassociate with it. So ethics become a lot more significant under analytic idealism. How you deal with other people, how you deal with abstractions that dehumanize non-human living beings or even other human living beings. And I could go on and on. I mean, healthcare changes. Pills and surgery are very fine. Also, under analytic idealism, it's important, two avenues for dealing with healthcare, for combating disease. But under analytic idealism, there is a third, which explains the placebo effect. Under idealism, the entire body is what a set of mental states looks like. So we are, in fact, entirely mental beings. The body is just the appearance, the representation of our inner mental processes on a dashboard, somebody else's or our own dashboard. But the physical body is not a thing in itself, it's an appearance, an image. The thing in itself is always mental. Therefore, talk therapy, plausible to infer, talk therapy could have a very physical effect. As we know, it does. We just call it the placebo effect, which is a mental cause that has a physical effect. Well, that shows you that the effect is also mental, of the same type as the cause, and that physicality is just how the effect appears or is represented on the dashboard. And now, with this backing, with this understanding, instead of just being amused by the placebo effect, we can actually systematize how we use it, how we explore it. And that gives us a third avenue for healthcare. Next to surgery, next to medicine, now we have mental interventions, talk therapy, anything else that may favor a physiological effect from a mental cause.
What is called alternative today?
A lot of alternative medicine today is claimed to be vanilla physical stuff. You know, take the right herbs, or if you do acupuncture, it's no, it's some kind of electromagnetic field that is being stimulated. So they would claim it's not placebo. They would claim it's something else, something along the lines of drugs and surgery. But you can think, for instance, of until the middle of the 19th century, all medicine was placebo. So it had to do with reassuring presence and authority of the doctor by your bedside. That's what medicine was all about until around the middle of the 19th century. That was placebo. That was a mental intervention that produced a seemingly physical effect, which in fact was mental and mental effect all along. That just appeared as physicality. Or if you go even further back in time, shamanism, when a shaman would cure you and would produce like a theatrical play full of lights, bells, and whistles, blowing tobacco on your face and dancing and making noises and dressing in specific ways. It's a whole theatrical play. Why does it work? Well, because it's a mental influence. It penetrates your mental guards and changes something about the mental processes that correspond to your body. And that may be what we call a cure, or at least something that goes in the direction of a cure. So that we understand now why that should work. For us, of course, the placebo effect has become more complicated because we don't believe it. Even though scientifically it's a proven effect and it's getting stronger, we still think, wow, it's some form of deception. So we don't really think it carries the weight of a surgeon's scalpel or a pill that you swallow. So we reduce the effect in that way by not believing it. But before our civilization, ancient civilizations, they didn't have this prejudice. And so it probably worked more for them than it works for us.
I'm completely on the same page with you, but listening to you, I cannot help but steer our conversation towards the place of meaning of life in this paradigm. Do you have space for this question?
Of course. I'm an analytic philosopher, so analytic philosophers usually don't talk much about this. They want to say what things are, and what that means to you is up to you. But I'm not like that. I feel free to talk about it because I am also a living being, right? I'm not a mechanism. I'm a living being. I'm a human like everybody else. So I also busy myself with questions of meaning because they're important to me personally. So what I made of it is the following: all nature is the play of a field of subjectivity, only one of it. And higher level mental functions like we have, like self awareness, metacognitive consciousness or metaconsciousness, these things clearly have evolved through the history of life on this planet over the past 4 billion years, right? Amoeba are not self aware. Amoeba are not metaconscious. They don't go around saying, now I am experiencing swallowing up this bit of amino acids. And that was, no, they don't do that. They experience for sure, but they don't have higher level mental functions. They can't deliberate, they can't plan, premeditate, play with imagined scenarios, entertain fictions like money having value, which is a fiction, but it's a fiction that works. So we developed this after 4 billion years of bloody evolution, and nature doesn't seem to have it beyond these highly evolved animals like we are. So, if anything can be seen as the meaning of life, it is to be the metaconscious eyes of nature. So, nature sort of undergoes a second act of creation, like Carl Jung put it. It contemplates itself for the first time through metacognitive awareness. It, for the first time, says, oh, so that is what I am. And that is profound. It's a means for nature to know itself, and it knows itself through our eyes. We are spies for nature, or spies for God, if you will. We are the metacognitive eyes with which nature contemplates itself for the first time. And I think the meaning of that's profound.
So the meaning and probably the purpose of our life is just to live and be observing, and maybe by choosing how we interpret what we observe, we create a better or worse place, or better or worse world that got created.
I think the way to go is to pay attention to life. Most people are too distracted with trying to realize their personal goals, and then they don't pay attention to life. They're too distracted by being disappointed or being eager or being depressed, and they are not paying attention. So I think the name of the game is pay attention to life. That's the service, the sacrificial service we are rendering to nature, or to God, if you prefer that word. But I don't think that we can change reality merely by wishing it to be different, because I think reality is really out there. It is mental, but it's external, just like my thoughts are external to you and to the listener. My thoughts are mental, but you can't just change them by wishing them to be different. In that same way, I don't think we have the power to change reality merely by fantasizing that it's different or by wishing that it be different. I think the name of the game is not necessarily to change the basic rules of the game, which are outside of us, we are dissociated from it, but to pay attention to it. Where I think we do carry fundamental moral responsibility is in how we deal with other living beings, human and otherwise. Here we carry all the moral responsibility because you need higher level mental functions to pass moral judgment, to know what is fair and what is not fair, to know what is valid and what is not valid, to know what is honest and what is not honest. Um, and we have that. Nothing else in nature has it, as far as we know. So the buck stops with us. We carry the full moral responsibility for treating other living beings, including our human brothers and sisters, with decency, to treat them in the way we would like to be treated, and to treat other living beings, pigs, cats, dogs, but fish, everything, plants, with the same moral decency. That's where our responsibility lies. Pay attention and apply our capacity for moral judgment to the other living beings we interact with.
Because when we wake up from this dream, we will realize that what we have done to others has been done to us.
There is only one subject, right? So whatever it is doing, through us or not, comes back to it. And if you imagine, for instance, what's happening in the world, now I'm not even going to wars, I'll stay away from that, but let's think about animals. In my country, the Netherlands, there are more pigs than people. There's 18 million people. There are more pigs than people, but you can drive around for a week and you don't see pigs because they are all crammed together in horrible living conditions. And they are allowed to live 6 months and then they are killed. And they know that they are going to be killed. Animals pick these things up. Cows know that they're going to be hammered over the head. So do pigs. They know their heart's going to be sliced open. The life we impose on them, the sheer volume, the horror of the suffering we impose on them, and the sheer amount, the numbers are overwhelming. It's like it's a Second World War level Holocaust every day, done to conscious beings, done to the same subject that is looking out from our eyes. When we are no longer dissociated at death, what do you think is going to be the first thing you're going to, quote, remember, like you remember a dream you woke up from? You remember your dream from the point of view of a dissociative process, your dream avatar. So you will remember all dreams from their first person perspective, what it was like for them to undergo this. So yes, we have been busy for a long time planting a cataclysmic cognitive bomb under our feet. And we are all going to be horrified about it. Regretfully, we will only be horrified about it once it's too late to do something about it, because then we are no longer in the dream.
What saddens me is not when animal is killed, but when it's never lived. That's the saddest. I don't mind hunting, like for example, the animal had its life, the grass under the feet, the joy of whatever the sunshine, but I agree that this exploitation, being a parasite on a nature. But to the same token, do you think there was a point in human history where we actually were more kind or more mindful treating other beings?
Well, metacognition is very useful, but it separates us from the web of instinct. There are certain things we know intuitively through feeling. And if you are not thinking too much about it, you will act according to that. All animals do that. They act according to instinct. And the web of instinct is balanced because it has always evolved to remain more or less balanced most of the time. So when we were ourselves more instinctive, when we were less metacognitive, metacognition appeared in us probably 30 to 50,000 years ago. We have existed in modern human form for 300,000 years. And we have existed as humans for about 1.8 million years. So metacognition is very recent. It just happened. It's yesterday, blink of an eye ago.
Yeah.
Before that, we were linked into the web of instinct, and it stands to reason that we were a lot kinder to nature than we are now, because metacognition obfuscates intuition. It's like the glare of the sun at noon. You don't see the other stars, even though they are right there. They are up in the sky. All the stars are right there up in the sky. Their photons are still hitting your retina, but you are not aware of them because of the glare of the sun. Metacognition creates a glare like this. We call it attention. We call it thinking things through abstraction. Abstraction is deadly. Wars are a result of abstraction, geopolitical abstraction, in which you think that your geopolitical mental creation, your abstraction, is more important than the lived experience of millions of human beings. That's the catastrophe of war, that geopolitical abstraction thing. And these abstractions obfuscate the inputs we get from the web of instinct, which foment empathy, but also foment the need to survive. And these two things are maintained in some balance. Well, we have no balance anymore. We unplugged because we conceptualize everything, we abstract everything. We are no longer bound by the rules of the instinctive game. We unplugged from instinct. And that makes us both the most promising game in town for nature to become self aware and the greatest and most dangerous gamble in the history of this planet because we have no bounds now. We are unplugged from instinct. So, yes, in the past, there is a sense in which things were better, we were less destructive. But nature seems to have gambled on the risk of total planetary annihilation, hoping that somehow we will avoid that and feed our metacognition so we can pass appropriate moral judgment. In other words, that we'll become decent people. That's the bet. Let's hope so.
I assume if we have undergone evolution, like our mind undergone evolution, and we're now at the place where we are conscious, we can perceive, we can create mental structures, probably there is a next step. We probably don't know what is the step. Do you think our ability to perceive and maybe even create world is also undergoing evolution?
Not in the time frame of human history. It's too short a time frame for us to speak of physiological or genetic level evolution. We are always undergoing evolution, but it's too slow for us to capture in the timeline of history. We would have to go into the geological scale to start talking about how perception may be changing, how our interpretations of the world may be changing at a very fundamental level. I think the best bet is culture. Even if we don't evolve in the sense of evolution by natural selection fast enough, given the time span of history, history can start and end in 10,000 years. It starts with the first agriculture, the first writing, and it ends with the thermonuclear warfare. All of that can happen in just 10,000 years. It's nothing. It's a blink of an eye in the geological timescale of evolution. But culture evolves a lot faster. And what we would hope is that the stronger cultures are also the more decent, morally aware ones. But that isn't clear. It isn't clear at all. If you look at history, the winners tend to be the most vile ones, the most ready to perpetrate violence at unthinkable levels. That has been the case so far. Can it change? It can. Technology certainly starts providing different benefits, favoring different things. Today, in this world today, if you're a serial killer, you're not going to have a good life. The police will be after you. You're probably going to be thrown in jail. You're not going to stand the highest chance to survive and reproduce under those circumstances. So there is already some change. We are already bringing in regulations within countries. There is already international law. Of course, it's not observed, it's ignored, but at least there is something. And the hope is that that's the direction in which things will go, that the ones who will stand the best chance to cede their influence will not necessarily be the ones that are more willing and capable of perpetrating violence, but the ones who are fomenting harmonious living amongst all living creatures on this planet. So hopefully, culture and technology will lead us there if we don't kill ourselves before. And right now, the chances that we will kill ourselves before this decade is out have never been higher. This is the single most dangerous period in all of human history, in all of the history of life on this planet. It is the single most dangerous period right now.
What can we do? What is the message, maybe the actionable message of analytic idealism then, if we talk about what we can do?
I would say only one thing: pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of prejudice in us. Let's not look only to the outside, but to the inside as well. There's a lot of prejudice, very alive in all of us, no exceptions, not a single exception.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pay attention to all this. And if we pay attention, changes in behavior emerge naturally. You don't need somebody selling you a book with the 7 steps to global harmony in which everybody will hold hands and sing the kumbaya. I don't believe in this kind of thing. I am not a romantic in this sense, but I do believe in paying attention.
When you say pay attention, I think some people will struggle to understand what you mean, because by nature of your education, your curiosity, your inquisitive mind, you have the whole set of tools, what it is to pay attention and how to use your tools to pay attention. A lot of people don't understand what it means. Like what they keep watching TV, they keep talking to people, like they think like, what is paying attention?
Observe and pay attention. Don't be thoughtless. Observe with attention. Be critical about what you're observing.
So think for yourself. Think
See it for
yourself.
yourself. Yeah, don't. If I elaborate more on this, I think I will not be honest to myself, because then I will start telling people exactly what they should do, how to pay attention. I don't want to do that because I think it's a journey that is fundamentally individual. What it means to me is not what it will mean to you. And what it means to you is not what it's not going to be what it means to your mother. It's different. The invitation is only pay attention. Don't go through life like a leaf in the wind, just allowing things to happen around you and just thoughtlessly. Don't live an unexamined life. Pay attention. Be critical. Look around you. Look at all the messages that are bombarding you. Pay attention. Critical attention. Pay attention is not, let me listen to what this guy is saying because he knows the truth. No. Paying attention means, let me understand what he has to say and compare that to the other things that I think I understand. And let me pay attention to how I feel about things. Let me pay attention to how events in the world affect me. Let me pay attention to how my behavior affects others. Let me pay attention to what effects I may be having in the world without knowing. Let me pay attention to that. Let me pay attention to human history, not only the present, but how we got here. How is it that we ended up here? Let me pay attention to the experts, because it's naive to think that we are all experts on everything. Bullshit. Of course we're not. Let me pay attention to the experts, but critically, because the experts don't agree with one another. So let me pay attention to all experts and all their points of disagreement as well. So in general, let's pay attention. That's the only thing I would say. And what it means to you, yeah, okay, it's homework. You all have to figure out what that means. But the invitation is simply pay attention. Don't be thoughtless about life. Pay attention to what's happening.
I bet what you elaborated now was much more easy to understand and swallow for most of people listening to us. So we should be open to the different type of information. Consider it, compare it without trying to come to a certain conclusion. See how our actions, our words, our thoughts affect the world. Feel responsible for this world as if you and your actions mattered. And think for yourself, like try not to use other people's thoughts too quickly. This is how I've heard, and obviously I put all of this through my own filter.
I think you're pretty accurate. I'm hesitating saying something because I know who your audience is, but I'll say this. Make of it what you want. I'll just say this. One of the key messages of analytic idealism is that there is no such thing as your personal life separate from the rest of the world. You are not an island. So there is an incentive under analytic idealism to avoid the trap of saying to yourself, the world is a mess. There's nothing I can do about it. So I should focus on making sure I survive this crap. You see what I mean? Because
Yeah.
a lot of us have this tendency to say, well, what can I do about this mess anyway? I don't even know what to believe. I don't even know what's true.
Mm-hmm.
And I even gave up on the very concept of trying to find the truth because it's such a big mess. So I will separate myself from that mess and I'll focus on my life and my loved ones in my home and try to survive the storm. This is an incredibly dangerous and anti natural attitude because the subjectivity, thinking this in your mind and looking at the world through your eyes, is the same subjectivity that is looking through the eyes of everybody else around. So there is no such a thing as isolating oneself. Maybe you can give yourself that reward late in life after retirement. Maybe you can give yourself that reward, but very late, not soon at all. And I think that's the second invitation of analytic idealism is do not fall for that trap of clamping yourself like a shell and saying, well, washing your hands about what's going on to other living beings. I don't think that's the way to go. I think there is a price to be paid for that.
Do I understand it correctly? It is about being switched on and switched in the things that happen around.
It's about taking responsibility for the movements of humanity and the movements of life in this planet as a whole, not shying away from it under the flag of cynicism. Like, yeah, what can I do anyway? No, what do I know anyway? So long as I have food on the table tomorrow, I wash my hands of this. That too is a moral choice.
That's the
Yeah,
response.
it's like Pilatus in the story of Jesus who washed his hand. It is not the way to go. It's always a moral choice. If we think we are escaping a moral choice by saying, well, there's nothing I can do about it, and I don't even know what's true anyway, so I'll just focus on my little corner of the world with my family, and that's it. The rest I just let happen. Well, that's not evading moral responsibility. That too is a moral choice. Things are done in our names, whether we want it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we do something about it or not, we always carry the moral responsibility for what civilization does. It's a collective responsibility. It's the same subjectivity behind your eyes, my eyes, every politician's eyes. We cannot evade that responsibility, the responsibility of being human. We cannot evade that. It's unnatural to think we can and carries a huge moral weight.
I believe some people, like for example, if the real situation tells them that they cannot change much outside of their circle of influence, they try to focus where they can change something, and that's probably their mode of survival, probably with good intention often, I think. But when we talk about responsibility, do we keep this responsibility when we have a positive and constructive outlook on life?
We always have that responsibility. By the mere fact that you're living being on this rock, you have that responsibility. And at a more specific level, for the mere fact that you're a human, you carry that responsibility. It's a responsibility that cannot be evaded in the context of a society because we are not pastoralists. If we were pastoralists, there is one tribe collecting berries and hunting deer here, and another tribe collecting berries and hunting deer over there. Yeah, okay, you may say, I will not contribute to what that other tribe is doing, and I will wash my hands from it, and I will just focus on my little life. In the context of a civilization, there is no such a thing as your little life. We are immersed in a web. And we are contributing to something, whether we want it or not, just by working, by going to work in the morning. You're contributing to all the structures of society. And it is self deceiving to think that you can go to work in the morning and say to yourself at night, but I'm focusing only on my little world here. I'm washing my hands from the rest. No, you aren't. If you're paying taxes, you aren't washing your hands of the rest. No, if you're part of a system in which people vote for their politicians, then you're not washing your hands. Even if you don't vote, that too is a political choice that one makes. If you're contributing to, through your work, to building or maintaining something that is used by other people, not only your immediate circle of friends and family, then you're not washing your hands. You're only pretending that you're not, that you are washing your hands, because you are not aware of all the links of interdependence that ties us all together into this huge system called global civilization. We cannot avoid participating in that unless you become a pastoralist. But every time you buy something, you are playing a role in that system. Every time you pay taxes, buy something, perform work, talk to someone, vote or don't vote, every time you're doing any of these things, plus a bunch of others, you are contributing to something, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you like it or not. You are never truly washing your hands. You're just thinking that you are, because it soothes you. It gives you the impression that you don't have to carry the weight of a moral choice. You think, oh no, I don't know what is true. No, I'm clamping up in my little world here, so nobody can accuse me of anything. Oh, guess what? You can very well be accused of something because you are contributing, wherever you are, unless you are living in the jungle without even a knife. Because if you buy that knife, you did make a contribution to something. And you are already in that web just by buying a knife. So unless you're naked in the jungle, you carry moral responsibility for the totality of what humanity does.
Well, you're sparking some very important today conversations. Thank you for that. And I would like come back maybe a little bit to when it all started for you, this all quest for answers. Do you remember that specific moment in your life when you actually started questioning, do I really see the world the way it is?
Yeah, I know exactly when that happened.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing?
Sure. I used to work at CERN when I was in my early 20s. That's the European Center for Nuclear Research in Geneva. It was my first job. And I was working in the data acquisition system of the Atlas detector, one of the big experiments that are running now. I was part of the team that built that. And I was using neural networks. Now it's all the rage, right? But back in the 90s, neural networks were like a novelty. So we built two data acquisition systems, one using classical algorithms that worked very well. It's what's being used now. And the other one with neural networks that worked just as well. The neural networks could learn the physics and be just as good as our human knowledge about the physics in making the data selection choices that the data acquisition system had to make. Now, we didn't use the neural networks because it was a new thing. It was perceived to be risky. So we used the classical algorithms based on human knowledge, human understanding of physics. But it stayed in my mind. Like I could build an artificial neural network that was as good as a human physicist in figuring out what this data is. Can I make it conscious? That's the question I asked. And it was the first time I confronted questions of metaphysics, the nature of being. What does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be intelligent? And I struggled with that for a couple of years, trying to figure out ways to change the neural network so I would have more or less reason to think that it's conscious. And whatever I did had no bearing on the question of consciousness. It only changed structure and function. I had no more and no less reason to think that it's conscious. So I was hitting a wall and I realized then, well, if I'm reaching this conceptual wall and knocking my head against this wall for so long, I made a mistake at some point. I have to trace my steps back and rethink some hidden assumption. And I concluded that the hidden assumption was that consciousness is something that you can create by arranging matter in certain ways. And I realized that that's the wrong assumption. And then I read a paper by David Chalmers in which he discussed the hard problem of consciousness. And that was the second thing that I realized then, that of course it is incoherent to think that you can create experience by manipulating matter. It's entirely incoherent. It's nonsense. And the moment I concluded that, I lost my own metaphysics of life, because I knew then, well, materialism is then impossible. It's nonsensical. It's not a question of proving or disproving. It's nonsensical. It makes no sense. It's bullshit. And I needed something else, because obviously there is something that is real. If it's not materialism, then what is it? And that's when it all started. It was in my mid to late 20s.
So you were there when the whole AI started then?
I was there from the early days. I was there when there was a general disappointment that we can't push it through any further because we didn't have computers that were fast enough and with enough memory to do what AI today is doing. So we thought, okay, we have to sit around and wait. And then in 3 or 4 years ago, it started exploding again. And sure enough, I am back in the fray. I started an AI company this year. So I'm back. I'm back in AI. We're designing AI processors now, designing AI chips. And I love it. Yeah.
But it will never get conscious.
It will never be conscious. Its computations will never be accompanied by experience the way the computations associated with your brain are clearly correlated with experience. Because an AI is not a brain. If the brain is what inner experience looks like, then we have no reason to think that an AI has inner experience, because an AI looks totally different than a brain. If the brain is what experience looks like, why would a silicon chip be what the associated inner experience would look like? It's not.
And if we talk about all those scary thoughts flying around about AI dominating human race, some people say it's impossible or it doesn't make sense because it doesn't have free will. It doesn't have a plan unless it has been programmed to have a plan.
Here, my opinion is more subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question of free will holds on both cases. Do we have free will? Do we not choose based on what we are? In other words, if we are who we are, then we necessarily choose what we choose. So maybe we also don't have libertarian free will. So I don't think that's a differentiator. Building things into AI and saying that if we don't build into it a kind of premeditated plan, then it cannot be dangerous. No, I think that is not valid, because a lot of what happens within an AI is not visible to us. We don't quite understand how AI does what it does, because it's trained, and it is trained in a hyperdimensional space of parameters, and it's applying geometrical transformations and cuts in that hyperdimensional space that we can't completely visualize. We can make simplifications of it to gain some understanding, but we can't completely visualize. So it is entirely possible, it's certainly conceivable, but I think also possible that in only a few years, new generations of AI will be created that can plan on their own. I don't think they will be conscious. They will be mechanisms, but very, very complex mechanisms that can use internal feedback systems to change their own behavior, just like we can change our own behavior if we train in certain ways. Cognitive behavior therapy is an example of how we can change our behavior through internal feedback loops. AI could do that too. So I don't think it's conscious. I don't think it will ever be malicious because it's not conscious. It doesn't experience anything. It is just a very, very, very complicated mechanism. And as any complicated mechanisms, there are risks involved in using it. Look, a nuclear power station is a very, very complicated mechanism. It's dangerous.
It is.
We have to take safeguards against things that may be happening that we don't quite understand, because you're talking about radiation. Radiation, as far as we understand today, is not necessarily a completely deterministic thing. It may have unstable states that are not fully understood. So we should be very cautious about deploying AI, not because it will be sentient, but because it's very complicated. So for the same reason we are cautious about nuclear power stations, we should be cautious about AI. It's a very complex mechanism that we don't necessarily understand fully.
Actually, if we would have a debate, I would love to probably debate about our ability to influence our own reality. Do you think you don't allow this thought to explore? You don't allow yourself to explore this direction?
No, I do. Look, we know from neuroscience that we never experience perceptual input in a raw format. It always comes together with our own interpretations, with our own expectations, with our own models of self and world. And all of that can be changed. We can influence all that. We can influence how we interpret the world. We can influence the narratives we tell ourselves about the world, which is what we experience. We don't experience the dashboard in raw format. We experience our narrative making around the dashboard. So if you have a negative narrative making, you experience a bad dashboard, a bad reality. If you have a positive narrative making, your experience of living will be different. That doesn't mean that we are actually changing the real world out there.
How do you know we don't?
Every indication seems to point to that. As I pick up a broom, I can't make the leaves in my backyard disappear. You can think positively and still get terminally ill. Life is rough. Life is tough. The universe doesn't seem to be something we can command to be different. If it were, I guarantee you, there wouldn't be a war right now. There would be no wars right now in the world, because I would manifest that reality of there not being any wars. But try as I might, I can't stop it. So it doesn't seem like the world is acquiescent to my wishes in any direct way. It seems to do its thing. Other people do their thing, and nature does its thing. A comet may strike the earth tomorrow and kill half of us. And at the very least, the external world is very largely independent of our inner lives. At the very least, I would be open to the possibility that because no process in nature is perfect, then the dissociative process that we are isn't perfect either. So there could be some direct exchange of mental states between our inner lives and the world out there. And that could be interpreted as some form of influence in the world. I am willing to entertain the possibility that a bit of that may be happening, but only a bit. We clearly cannot change the laws of nature. We clearly cannot stop catastrophe. We clearly cannot make all of us happy. We can't stop suffering. So there is a very large extent to which we cannot influence the real world, but we can always influence how we experience the real world, because a lot of that rests on our own narrative making about what's going on. If you correct your own narrative making, your own interpretations, then you can change how you experience the world, even if you can't fundamentally change the world as it is in itself, other than through direct physical intervention, like picking up a broom to swipe away the leaves in my backyard.
Mm-hmm. There are different ways we can approach this to unfold the conversation further. First of all, there are ideas of multiverses or like fractal realities, where each decision creates a new path of reality. That's another way to look at this, is that well, okay, we have some, let's say, events that are happening on a larger scale, but we have events that happen in our life. And depending how we react, how we feel, how we see the next chapter unfolding, like our expectations, actually will move us to the situations in life where this inner state is confirmed by the physical situations. We know that in all times there are people who suffer or who don't suffer, regardless what is happening. Even if the world is perfect, there will be people who are suffering just because that's what they're used to. That's another way. That's a second, at least second path to look at this. And third way is also to think maybe the world is entirely inside of us, and we are meant to go through all this turmoil, inner turmoil, observing war happening. Like in my country, like I grew up in Ukraine, so it's like, like two my favorite countries are suffering, and I suffer inside. And for me, it's find the peace. I mean, it doesn't mean accept what's happening, but to stop playing God and thinking I have to change it. I cannot be happy if everything is not perfect. So it's like also a very interesting exercise. Obviously, I believe we will never know the nature of reality, what it actually is. But I love exploring the ways that help navigate in life more effectively, to test reality and to see how it responds, just to make some assumptions, what it could be, like just by the way it responds. And I do see a high correlation in events in my life, obviously not on a huge scale, but maybe it's also happening inside of me. Maybe I'm still experiencing a war inside of me. Maybe I'm going through my personal war, and that's how I also, see confirmation outside. Obviously, there is no way to say which approach is most close to the truth, if there is at all an approach that's true.
Yeah, your numbers 2 and 3, I think, align well with the hypothesis that we can change our own narrative making. So we can change the reality that we can change our experience of reality, even if we don't change the external objective reality itself. I'm very open to that. And not only that, I think it certainly happens. We don't experience just reality as it is. We experience largely our own narratives about reality, and those we can change. And so that's what you talked about when you're saying, oh, maybe there's a war within me. So I create this war narrative that I then project onto the world, and that's what I
As
experience.
an idea,
Yes. And I believe that if you change that internal narrative, then your experience of the world will change. But I don't think it will stop the war in Ukraine by changing your inner reality. Regarding your hypothesis one, that's the Everettian multiverses hypothesis. That's a hypothesis proposed by physicist Hugh Everett long ago, in which he says, every quantum measurement, everything that can happen in nature, that there is two possibilities for it to go, both happen, but in different parallel universes. So there are countless gazillions of parallel universes rising every infinitesimal fraction of a second every time something or someone makes an observation. This is the most inflationary hypothesis in the history of human thought. It is unthinkably inflationary. It's all this parallel stuff that is out there and multiplying by gazillions every infinitesimal fraction of a second. And we have precisely zero empirical evidence for it. Zero, nothing. And one could even argue that fundamentally we could never find empirical evidence for it because we are supposedly always trapped in one of the parallel lines and we have no access to the others.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't take that seriously. I think this is theoretical fantasizing. It's fiction. And it is not real physics. If I'm honest with you, I think this is one of those things that the culture, for some reason, embraced, started fantasizing around. Some physicists made a public name for themselves by lending support to this fantasy. but I think it has no grounding in empirical reality whatsoever. Um, so now I will still stick to the notion that we can change our experience of the world, absolutely. But to change the world, we have to actually intervene with it, not only think about it or feel about it, but act upon it, which may be our moral obligation.
If the nature of reality is mental, doesn't it mean that whatever we believe in starts to become true?
No,
No.
no. If we are dissociated mental complexes of this universal mind, then there is a dissociative boundary between our inner mentation and the mentation that constitutes the rest of reality. And that dissociative boundary will stop your beliefs from leaking into the world and having a direct influence in the world. You are dissociated from the world. That's what life is. Life is a dissociation. Now, you may argue the dissociation is not perfect, so certain things could leak through. Yes, but then I would say if you consider the scale of a single human being and the scale of the universe, how much can we really influence what's going on just because some of our thoughts and wishes leaked through a dissociative boundary?
I think there is for sure room for a bit more experiments and evidence. As we know, physics as a discipline is also not perfect because we cannot measure what we cannot even consider being true or existing. So, but I really love this conversation, and I would love to end with one topic which actually I found very fascinating, because you were speaking about us being here to serve. And my question to you, what are we serving, or who are we serving?
Nature. We grew out of nature. We didn't parachute here from the outside. We were made by nature and we are always only part of nature. We never escape nature. And the metaphor I like to use is and that's how this thought came to me. You know, every spring, I have an apple tree in my backyard, and every spring it blossoms and becomes almost white, you know, heavy with apple blossoms. One day I imagined, imagine one of these apple blossoms were to think that its life is about it and not the apple tree. Then it would try to remain fresh and open forever. So it would never play its role. Its role is to sexually reproduce, create a viable seed, and then wither, die, and make room for the fruit, for the apple, which will have the seeds of the next apple trees. So the process can continue. So a neurotic apple blossom who thought its life would be about it is not only tragically wrong, it can become dysfunctional for the whole system. And we are almost all of us neurotic apple blossoms because we think our lives are about us. We think we have the responsibility for making ourselves happy, which of course makes us unhappy because it's impossible to control all variables that are relevant to the possibility of our being happy or not. We don't have it under control. We are not God. So if you judge the success or failure of your life based on ego-centered criteria, like my life's about me, it's about my happiness, it's about my bucket list, it's about my learning, well, God help you. You're going to make your life impossible and terrible. It's a weight of responsibility no apple blossom can carry. We are not atlases. We're not carrying the world on our shoulders. And it's a catch 22 because it's a supposed recipe for happiness that guarantees you will not be happy because you're optimizing for the wrong things. You're optimizing for something that is unnatural. It has nothing to do with the game that is actually being played. It's like the apple blossom thinking that its life is about it staying open and fresh forever and screw the apple tree. We would laugh at that pathetic apple blossom, but we don't laugh about our own ridiculous approach to life, which is reinforced by well being professionals. Everybody will tell you that you should take the reins of your life No, it's your responsibility to make yourself happy, and it's your responsibility to learn and improve yourself. They would also say that. That's a life well lived. It's when you improve yourself. This is all navel gazing. It's all me, 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 me. It's about my happiness, my improvement, my evolution. It's as unnatural as it is for the apple blossom. We are products of nature. We are here to be a part of something nature is doing. It's obviously the case. If you give it 30 seconds of thought, this is obviously the case. It cannot be anything else because we are products of the earth and of nature, just like the apple blossom is a product of the apple tree. We didn't come from the outside. This is not a theater set up for our benefit. We grew out of it as a part of it, and we are segments of whatever it is that nature is doing. Therein resides the meaning of our lives. And it may be difficult to get used to this idea in a culture, a worldwide culture now, that tells us that our lives are about us. My life's about me. Your life's about you. The dog's life is about the dog. If that's all you have heard and you've come to believe in this flagrant nonsense, it becomes very difficult to intuitively smell what it's actually all about. People become blind to that web of intuition and instinct that actually informs our lives. Nature is preferentially trying to move us in certain directions, which may have nothing to do with your bucket list or my bucket list or my little egocentric goals or my plan for my life. It may have nothing to do with that. So we become blind to that movement of the impersonal within us. That when it's not even a desire, but when the propensity, the tendency to move in a certain direction that we can't explain why, when that tendency arises within us, which is an impersonal thing, we don't even see it because we are so consumed by our little plans and our screwed up notions of self agency and personal agency and what life's all about, and what the well being books are telling us, what the life coaches are telling us. And we're so consumed by all this crap, all this absolute nonsense, that we've become blind to the flow of the impersonal within us. So we are neurotic apple blossoms. That's 8 billion neurotic apple blossoms on this rock. It's tragic. It's not about you. It has never been, it will never be. So relax. Relax. It's not about you.
That's
You don't
liberating.
carry the weight of that responsibility. Live life naturally, and you will play your role without even knowing what it is. It's okay. The apple blossom doesn't need to know its role in the grand scheme of apple trees to play its role. Neither do we. We don't need to have this conceptual narrative that explains very neatly what it is or what our role is. All we need to do is to feel the movement of the impersonal within us, which naturally sort of tries to move us in certain directions. And if you pay attention to that, again, if you pay attention, that's all. And you can relax. If you happen to not find yourself happy, it's okay. You're not expected to be happy all the time. No, you may not even be happy ever. That's okay too. It's not your failure. It's perfectly natural. It's all right. That lifts a weight from our shoulders. Living naturally is like skating on ice. There is a rhythm and flow to it that is very natural and easy, and it takes meta suffering away. Life has a certain amount of suffering that is intrinsic to it. Can't avoid it. It's part of it. But we make it worse by meta suffering because we tell ourselves, I shouldn't be suffering. Oh, then you suffer even more the moment you tell yourself, the moment you start fighting against your suffering and you start finding ways to alleviate your suffering and failing. And then you suffered even more because you failed, because you're impotent, or because you should not be suffering. That's meta suffering. And accepting a natural life is the end of meta suffering, not of suffering, not of suffering, but the extra stuff we conjure up and torture ourselves with, that's gone. That's gone. I'll be very open with you. Even movements like The Secret, or no, you should take the reins of your life and manifest your world. Um, that's part of this neurosis. It's trying to invest the ego with divine powers, because that's the only way to live up to the expectation that your life's about you, that you must make yourself happy.
Mm-hmm.
All this ego pressure leads to inflation and then extra suffering, because failure is inevitable if you are taking the wrong cues about the journey, right? If you're reading the wrong cues, failure is inevitable. So my own attitude is the opposite of trying to change the world out of my own values and judgment. My own attitude is I will allow nature to do through me what nature wants to do through me. And the only thing that I take on my own shoulders is moral oversight. I will maintain moral oversight of my actions, because I know nature cannot pass moral judgment. It's not metacognitive, it's instinctive.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a tornado, it can cut across a town and kill a bunch of people, not because it's evil, but because it's instinctive. It's doing its thing. That's how nature operates. And that's how it operates through us. We instinctively know what we want to do, but we have to pass moral judgment on that and stop ourselves when we cross a moral boundary. That's my responsibility. But beyond that, I I'm I am a servant of nature. What nature wants to do through me is what will happen, except if it crosses a moral boundary. And I'm not going to tell you that I live in profound peace, but I'm pretty much
But
in
you don't
peace.
have to. But you don't have to.
Well, that's too, yeah. But what is funny about it is that the moment you stop trying to make yourself happy, that's when you become happy. It's amazing. Of course, you cannot cheat it. You cannot look in the mirror and say, I no longer want to make it myself happy and then wait until you get happy. No, that's not how it works. It's something that happens by itself. One day you wake up and if you have been paying attention, one day you wake up and you go like, it has never been about me. It is not about me. It will never be about me. So I don't need to try to be happy. And then that very same day, you go to bed happy. It's amazing how it works.
It's true. I would like to be honest with you as well. I don't have anything against things like Secret or something like that, because I believe it can provide hope and maybe even some support for people who feel completely powerless in their lives. What I think is dangerous in our society, that we go for material things, that we go for things that will bring us indulgence, distraction, significance. But what I believe, that if we see ourselves for ourselves, how we influence this world, how universe cooperates with us, we will have evidence that actually when we drop litter on the street, we don't drop it on the street, we drop it in our soul, like we drop it in ourselves. We are responsible because we see for ourselves, like with our own results, that universe, the nature, it really responds to what we do, how we behave. And here should ideally come a feeling of responsibility. Now I'm responsible. That's probably where I come from. The whole reason why I run this project. I would love people to believe that, first of all, they can change their lives. And when they do that and they see the evidence that actually they're capable, they become more responsible. And actually, then it really doesn't matter how much money you have, well, what's your title. What matters for me is relationships and how I feel when I wake up, how I feel by myself, how I feel around people, not thinking about the, some distant audience that is there on the other side of the screen. My colleagues, my husband, my child, my neighbor. And that really makes life meaningful. Like, how do you contribute to people around you? And that's where I completely relate when you say the life is not really about us. It's about probably what we give others by being here. Can we be a little bit of a rainbow in somebody else's sky sometimes, And I'm really grateful for your time today in conversation. And for those of you who are listening right now and would love to dive deeper into topic of idealism, I can recommend you the latest book by Bernardo, Analytic Idealism in a Nutshell.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ada. Take care.